My name is Waisa Chiksad. I've been in the finance industry for the last 20 plus years, working for the likes of Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, Morgan Stanley, and I am and always will be a student of leadership. To me, leadership has always been a subject that I've been fascinated about. I think it really started with me when I entered the corporate world, and I really quickly I got a sense for how important my manager was to me. Every day I walked into work, like I actually felt happy or sad or disconnected or like I had motivation. Those feelings were essentially based on my manager's leadership and the way that they approached me and my team and the culture that was there. Now, the research shows, plenty of research has been done, that the number one reason that people leave their jobs is bad bosses. Simple as that, and a bad culture. The number one reason, by far. And that's very costly to companies. So if you talk about your bottom line as a company, when those individuals leave in mass, there's a significant impact to the bottom line. And then to the reputation of the firm, of that particular team, that organization. And so we need to prevent that from happening. And there are ways to go about how do we get to a better place as leaders to prevent those things from happening. So there are 5 problem areas that I can definitively say are gaps that we as leaders need to address. 1 is the generational gap that exists. 2 are middle managers. 3, clients and profits being emphasized more than our people. 4, too much hierarchy in our organizations. 5, lack of diversity at the top of the house as far as our leadership is concerned. I've spent a lot of time actually on the ground talking to my peers, my senior management, people actually doing the jobs on the ground at every level. One of the key issues that I'm seeing, and I've seen firsthand, is sort of the age gap in terms of, from a leadership perspective, you have sort of those that have been in their seats for many years who sort of have that same outlook on things. And then you have the new generation of employees coming in. What are we doing to bridge the gap in terms of the mentality from those generations that are coming in, those employees, the new workforce? Let's face it, they have a different outlook on life. Their priorities are different. They look at the world differently than when there are people who have been around for 10, 15, 20 years in those leadership capacities. And so what are we doing to account for that gap? Are we making an effort to truly make a connection with those people coming into the work industry? I don't know if we are. And so I think that's a big reason as to what we're also seeing today as far as what we call the Great Resignation. So middle managers at any organization play a critical role, if not probably the most important role in any organization. They are the bridge between the leaders at the top who are setting the firm's objectives, and they're also connected to those on the ground that are actually carrying out the job. So how did middle managers get to their position? Middle managers got there because they were good at what they did. They were good at the job that they did. They were trained to do that job. They got good at it. And so they were thrust into a leadership position. Oh, you're really good, so why don't you now manage a team of 10, 15, 20? Now, who taught them how to lead? Who taught them how to handle adversity, to handle pressure? So how are you handling those issues that inevitably arise, the challenges, the personalities, the conflict? That's a major problem. And then what happens is there's a disconnect between those on the ground to those that are actually now in charge of them, who were doing the job once, and now that there's typically issues that arise in that space. That's a major gap right now that I'm seeing, that I've seen for many years now. And so we need to do a better job of giving the middle managers the tools to become better leaders, and so that they can inspire their staff, they can feel connected to their staff. And that's an area that we need to address. So another observance that I have is that we place an incredible amount of emphasis on our clients, as we should. However, if we place that same emphasis on our people that are actually doing the jobs, then they would actually feel inspired without having to provide them any client training or anything. They would just organically feel vested in the mission of the company, and in turn, your clients are happy, and with that, the profits will come. I think another issue that I've observed is that hierarchy, there's too much of an emphasis placed on hierarchy in any organization. And there's too much distance between those on the top making the decisions and those on the ground actually carrying out their objectives. And so if we can sort of bridge that gap as well and give those on the ground the voice to be able to make the decisions, to be able to be included in some of those key objectives in any organization, giving them a platform to speak in, and sort of cutting out all those different layers. People can still have their titles, but I think that is essential in the speed of delivery of tasks in any organization. And not only that, so you create efficiency inherently just by shifting that approach, but you make everyone feel included, regardless of the time spent in any company. And that in itself will transform any organization. Another area of leadership that I think we can address, and it's being proactively addressed right now with as far as diversity and inclusion, though, is the diversity at the top of the house of any organization. And when I say that, I'm talking about diversity with regards to different cultural backgrounds and different upbringings. And so what happens when you have that diversity up top, it brings a different mindset in terms of ideas, and it's a diversity of leadership thought is what I call it. And that, I think, is essential in any organization so that you have different perspectives and you have different points of view that are making decisions rather than one voice and one point of view, which I feel like has been a constant in a lot of organizations for so long. So yes, we're making a more concerted effort to have diversity and inclusion in any organization, but are we doing that at the higher levels? So I think our corporate leadership training dynamic, I think it's antiquated in its overall approach. And to me, a 2-day offsite where you get in a room with 50, 60 people and talk about a scripted method of leadership, I think those days are gone. We spent millions of dollars on these programs, at least the bigger companies do. And I think what we really need to do is think a little bit differently in our approach towards training our leaders. It's all about being authentic, it's being genuine, leadership is organic. So to have some deck outline all the steps of leadership, I just don't think you walk away from those training programs feeling satisfied in that you're a better leader. One thing I aspire to do when I take on any team, and I've been fortunate to have led more than a few teams at these various organizations that I mentioned, is that I've adopted a certain approach that I believe has been quite effective. And again, there's no prescription to leadership. It's just a foundation for how you take on a team and your approach. And so I call it ACE, approach, culture, excellence. You get the approach right based on all of the variables and dynamics of those individuals on your team. You create an optimal culture, which allows for them to excel. And you achieve excellence as individually and as a team. How do you handle pressure? How do you handle adversity? How do you handle crisis? Right? All that comes out in the emails that you sent, in the tone of your words to your team, your body language, all those details in how you form connections with your employees, right, during those times, and how do you communicate with them during those times, right? So your approach dictates, or ultimately actually creates a culture, right? And so there's nothing more important than in any organization than the culture of the organization. But it's your approach as a leader that creates the culture. So my goal always is to create the most optimal culture so that everyone can reach their potential. How do you know if everyone reaches their potential if you don't form a connection with each person individually as well as collectively as a group? Now, if you can allow that sort of safe space for that individual to grow and to flourish, then you create that optimal culture, then of course you're going to achieve excellence in the output. Anytime as a leader, if I had the opportunity to take on a team that was less than perfect in terms of its performance or was dysfunctional or didn't achieve the levels that it should have, I implemented these particular measures, what I call approach, culture, and excellence. And it is incredible, the transformation of these teams that I witnessed firsthand. These were the same teams that were deemed to be dysfunctional, right? There were employees on those teams that were considered fireable. I had managers that told me that I should fire those people, hire new people. I would take on the same people, and I implemented sort of this approach that I've been talking about, and those same exact people would perform at levels that I knew they were capable of if the right culture was provided for them. And so that shift in approach changed the whole dynamic of our organization, of our culture. And you would see the performance of that same individual that my manager had said should be fired to them being one of the top performers in the organization. That happened countless times. And so that just shows you, in a nutshell, why it's so important to have the right culture, the right leader. Now, we also talk about scale. Is this approach scalable? Absolutely. If you have a team of 1,000 and you had 10 direct reports, then apply some of these principles with those 10 direct reports. That'll trickle down to the rest of the organization, because you're the ones responsible for setting the culture, right? It's you 10 people who are the direct reports are setting the culture for the rest of the organization. So we talk about scale. It is absolutely scalable. I also believe it's industry agnostic. It doesn't have to be in finance. These are just common sense measures that we need to apply, we need to practice. And in the end, what does it really boil down to? It boils down to really caring for the people who are actually doing the job. That's all it boils down to. If you have the privilege of being in a position to influence those around you, then this is your time to examine whether or not you are the leader that you wish you had at this time. If you're not, then I think we really need to shift the approach and the mentality as to what does it mean to be a leader, the responsibilities that we have to those around us, and to make people better around us, to connect with people, and to place an emphasis on taking care of them. Have your employees achieve more than they thought that they ever could, and you will see them excel within the organization, outside of the organization, because they essentially reached their potential, or at least almost maximized it. And so if you, as the person who is their manager, that they can count on, that they can trust, have instilled that confidence in them to achieve those heights, and I've seen that countless times, then that brings me the most satisfaction. And my job as a leader is done.